Hi, I'm Chris Caligari. Welcome to Ultimate Wildlife Gardens. Now this video is exploding a couple of myths. The first one is that biodiversity can be increased in a garden by including lots of plants which are nectar-rich, pollen-rich and attractive to insects. That is a misunderstanding. Is it helpful? Yes, but it doesn't increase the biodiversity of the garden, which lots of people seem to claim, including the illustrious Alan Titchmarsh. I've read quite a few of his quotes. Very knowledgeable gardener, excellent broadcaster, somebody I've met on a couple of occasions. He's a good chap, but I think he's misunderstood a few basics which we'll explore in this video. The second one is rewilding, a term which is often bandied around but very much misused. Is it possible to rewild a garden? The answer is no, it isn't. I'm very much in favour of rewilding, but unfortunately one cannot rewild a garden. I'll explain why. You cannot rewild a garden in general, almost without exception, because it's not sufficiently large an area. For example, in my garden, I do not have grazing animals which will keep grassland in some sort of stable state. I don't even have rabbits, unfortunately, in this area. I don't have herds of deer. I don't have wild ponies. I don't have anything here which really would graze grassland and maintain it. I also don't have wild boar, which are going to plough up the ground in places and create other opportunities for wildlife. Basically, rewilding has a very specific meaning in ecology, and we shouldn't really bandy it around. So folks that talk about rewilding areas, they don't usually actually mean that, and I don't think that really helps their cause. We should speak of rewilding in instances such as a farm, such as an estate, where a large piece of ground is turned over to wildlife. It does work, it's an excellent thing to do for conservation, but we really must not refer to doing rewilding in our gardens, introducing wild areas. Yes, that's absolutely fine. I prefer to talk of creating habitats. Habitats are places where living things can live. And when I say live, that means that we're not simply providing opportunities for them to feed, because that's not a habitat. A habitat should provide all the requirements that a species has in order to live. To live, to feed, to breed, to overwinter should meet all its requirements. Habitat diversity is really what we're aiming for. Rewilding is a misnomer. Sorry about that, but we should get that right. That's myth number one. Myth number two. I think we'd better visit a churchyard near me where I'll explain what I mean by the fact that conventional gardens and gardens that are rich in garden plants are often said to be great for biodiversity. I say they're not, and this is why. I'm visiting a churchyard to deal with the other myth, which is to do with biodiversity, and it is so misunderstood. Great God, this is an awful place. If we take this churchyard, why have I come here first of all? Well, if I turn up at somebody's garden and I start saying, this is a great example of what you shouldn't do, then often they're not going to be too happy. A churchyard is a fairly neutral place where I can make my own comments as much as I like. Now this area is mowed to within an inch of its life, and it is kept this way as far as I know at all times. I've known this churchyard for several years. As I say, it's close to my house, and it it is constantly mowed. I come here because I think we can all agree that this is an area of low biodiversity. If we look at the vegetation here, very limited number of species. Weeds, as we might call them, wild plants, are very, very scarce. Now, that is not a desirable state of affairs. Okay, so we said the biodiversity of this particular area is very low. It's the same as a well-manicured garden. There are many spaces which I see which are equally very, very poor as far as biodiversity goes. Right, so let's suppose that the person that looks after this churchyard decides, I think we'll put a couple of buddleias in, butterfly bushes. Now what will happen when the bush gets mature is it will attract quite a few species of butterflies. Let's say it attracts, we record for a day and we record 8 species of butterflies visiting that butterfly bush, that buddleia. Great. Now, if we're good naturalists, we will also visit it at night because a good many moths will also visit it. Also, you'll have less conspicuous animals visiting it. It might be things like pollen beetles or hoverflies. So it's not too difficult to work out that over 24 hours recording, something like that, we have apparently increased the biodiversity of this area by 20 species, maybe more, maybe 30 species. Now, we haven't done anything to speak of. What we've done is put a buddleia in, and that provides, shall we say, a watering hole. That provides a service station of some value, yes, of course, but have we really increased the biodiversity of that churchyard? I'd say it's obvious that we haven't. Why? Because for me, if we're going to increase the biodiversity of an area, we need to increase the number of creatures which can actually live there. Many biodiversity estimates are worked out by sampling. You just sample what is there. But really, if we're interested in conserving wildlife, we need to know how many creatures can actually live there. Specific example, in this area where this churchyard is, some butterflies are reasonably common, but one that we see scarcely over recent years has been the comma. Now, the comma butterfly happens to be one of my personal favourites, but it is really quite scarce. We really should not, in my opinion, include the comma butterfly as being a species which can live in this churchyard. So what we're doing with that buddleia bush is producing something attractive, and so we're drawing species in from a much wider area. The habitat potential of the space, if we create habitats, that's where creatures, as I say, can actually live out their lives and supply all of their needs, then we're doing something worthwhile. Having flower-rich areas is not helping wildlife greatly. And so therefore, people that speak about having wonderful herbaceous borders which attract lots of butterflies and bees, well, there's two things wrong with it really. One, they're only responsible for more or less a service station, useful for a feed, but not really helping the species greatly. And number two, we have a tendency to only take note of conspicuous species. Butterflies are easy to spot, robins are easily to spot, but they're not representative of the wide range of wildlife which should be in an area. Things like grasshoppers, things like slowworms, things like grass snakes, all sorts of creatures, the small mammals which animals feed on, which are many species feed on. Absolutely essential if we're to improve the value of our areas. Okay, final point on that topic. I recently saw a video presented by somebody on YouTube, and he said that he was going to do away with the wildflower meadow which he'd established in his garden after 3 years. Obviously, he's perfectly entitled to do that. The reason? Essentially, because it was too untidy. Now, this brings us back again to this business of tidiness. He was actually doing something which was far more precious than perhaps he realised, in that he was providing habitats. It may not have been flower rich and it may have disappointed him, but that really is missing the point of wildlife gardening. We shouldn't be too concerned with the pretty flowers, essential though they are, but often insects and other nectar feeders, there are quite generous proportions of nectar available. I have an area of at the front of the house which is of a more conventional garden with lots of nectar-rich plants in it. So often the provision of nectar is not a limiting factor on the well-being of a species. Far more important is to concentrate on providing the habitats. So if we return to the common butterfly, a buddleia, and providing a feeding station for it, I won't say it's of no value. Yeah, good. Is it enough to help to increase the biodiversity of the garden and to increase the number of commas? I'm afraid that's not going to do it. You need habitats, and in particular in the case of a comma, they will feed on other things, but the particular favourite is nettles. If you're going to exclude nettles, then that comma cannot survive in your space. You are not providing the habitat for the comma. You are therefore not increasing that particular range of species which feed on nettles. Long grass, similarly. You might perhaps get skipper butterflies visiting your garden. Excellent. But can they actually live there? Are you providing a habitat? They need long grass. Are they going to be able to survive the winter? Because not only do they need long grass during the breeding season, they need long vegetation, or at least the remains of long vegetation, in which to overwinter. So therefore, I take great issue with those that suggest that simply providing nectar-rich flowers is enough. It isn't. We've been trying it for decades. When I first started out as a garden designer in the early 90s, I must admit, I tended to think that it probably was enough. Surely the decline in our wildlife has shown us very, very clearly that it is not enough. What we're not doing is creating habitats, and therefore, unless we address that central issue, I'm afraid that these species will continue to decline. I know that sounds a bit of a rant. I'm passionate about wildlife. I'm sure you are too, and therefore I hope you will forgive me. Thanks very much for watching. My name's Chris Caligari. If you'd be kind enough to press the like, subscribe, and if you'd share this video, I'd be very grateful to you. Thanks ever so much for watching. Bye.